Have you ever considered tracking your time as a solo business owner? This was not something that I ever thought about doing because it's not a part of how my business works. My time spent working with my clients is directly with them. I have no need to kind of track that time for billable hours, as it were. But does that mean that I can't get any benefit out of understanding better where my time is spent? I don't think so. I mean, we've talked a lot about the channel before about the 80-20 rule and that idea that 20% of our effort turns into 80% of our results. So, how do you figure out exactly what that 20% is if you don't really know where your time is going? That was a question that came up for me a couple months ago when one of my clients asked me if I knew of a time tracking tool in Trello, which, yes, there are plenty. We'll get to that. But it really just kind of sparked that curiosity for myself. So I decided to track my time using Trello, of course, for a few weeks and kind of report back on what I learned from that. Before we dive into this, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell so that you never miss a tutorial or upload. Okay, so for the purposes of this little experiment, I'm going to be tracking my time in two different ways. One is through a power up that I found called Chronos. There are others. And so I will be including a link in the description to an article by, I want to say it's by Blue Cat, where they talked about a whole bunch of other ways that you can track time in Trello, different power ups and things like that. So I will put that there in case you want to check out and try different ones. But I went with Chronos for my first one. I'm going to show you how that went first. But then in the process of all this, I learned that there is actually a way to do this with automation. Shout out to my buddy Dream Sweet Mike in the Atlassian creator community who saved my bacon while I was figuring out how that automation works, how to set it up properly. A huge shout out to him. But first, I'll show you how it worked with the power up, and then I'll show you how it went with the automation. And then I'll come back at the end of it and tell you just kind of my overall thoughts about this whole thing. Okay, so my first attempt to do time tracking, I decided to use a power up, and I found the Chronos power up. What I obviously did not do was my research to see that I guess you only get access to it for close to a month and then your license expires, at which time I guess you have to subscribe. So, didn't know that. I totally understand, but as an experimental thing, this is not something that I'm wanting to pay for yet. So, I'm going to show you a little bit of how it worked. I can't really show you all of it now because I didn't record in time for that free time period, free trial, I suppose it was. So I'll show you a little bit how it works and then show you the log that I got out of that and what that information is telling me. So basically, the way it works is that you assign it to a particular board, or I guess if you're in a subscription, you might be able to assign it to more than one board. But when you are working on a task that you want to track, then you can actually click on, let's say, this fresh pins one. And even though you'll see my license is expired, it has a work log button here. So if my license wasn't expired, I'd be able to click this button and then it would start counting the time. And while I'm working, I just let it count. If I'm going to stop and do something for a second, there's a pause button option. So I can just pause it real quick and then start it up again. Or when I'm done with that task, I was able to hit the stop button and then fill in a little bit, type in some notes for myself as far as, like, in this case, how many pins got done. And then one of the things that I wanted to know was whether or not I was kind of multitasking. When it comes to certain tasks in my business, I give it my full focus attention. And then other things, my preference is to watch a YouTube video or listen to music or whatever while I'm doing it because it doesn't necessarily require my focused attention. But I also know that that slows me down. And so I wanted to keep track of those things for myself. There was also an option here before that I could manually log work. So one of the things that I don't love about doing this with a power up is the fact that power ups don't work in the mobile app. So if I was working on something and I was just doing it from my phone, I really wasn't able to have it track the time for me, which for some people might not be a big deal, but for me, it kind of is a really big deal. I do a lot of my work from my phone. So it's kind of tough for me to not be able to do that because then I have to remember to go back and manually add in the time tracking. And that kind of defeats the purpose for me. So it's one of the things that makes me not love the power up option. That plus the fact that as you can see, it's an additional cost, which I'm not thrilled about either. But let's look at the log that it gives me. So you can see here that it's giving me some totals as far as how much time was spent in a particular week. And you can see the cards of what I was working on in those particular days. So what I haven't done yet is go into one of these to see what information I might have tracked and whether or not I can still see that. So I keep seeing this 1 times. I think that's indicating, yeah, that there's one log. And you could see here, okay, this particular time I did 2 pins in 10 minutes. This tells me, because I know my process, that I was probably multitasking, even though I didn't tell it that. Let's look at this one. Yeah, so this one did 2 pins while I was listening to music and rehearsing for singing something on Sunday, so I was multitasking. But ironically, that took me less time. So that's interesting information, is that when I am focused on something like music, that actually helps me to focus more on the task at hand. Whereas when I'm doing something else, let's see if I have one. Oh, let's see. Okay, 2 pins while watching YouTube, and this one was only 4 minutes. So maybe this is telling me that in certain cases, like when I'm doing my pins, because like I said, they don't take the same kind of focused attention from me, they are actually things that I can do while letting myself be kind of entertained as well. I obviously know that that's not going to be the case for many of my other tasks, like filming for obvious reasons. Scheduling content, let's see, I've got 2 logs here. So this one took me 25 minutes to create a reel. Reels are not something that I enjoyed. So I had to do a lot of searching to find, stock footage that would work. And so it just took longer than I wanted it to. And then the rest of the content, it took me 45 minutes, but I used AI, as you can see, to help me plan and write initial drafts of the emails based on the plan. So that helped to make it go faster, but 45 minutes, that's me planning out an entire week of content. And then when you add in the reel as well, that tells me that took me a little over an hour to plan all of that. But because I only do that every other week, that doesn't kill me too much. When I look though here at scheduling my content for my own business, so this one was for the Success Through Community podcast, which I do every other week because I share that. But when I was planning my own content, it was 27 minutes. But when I come in here, that's just for the TSA Weekly, which is my email newsletter that goes along with the TSA Weekly podcast. The thing is, though, even though just doing one thing here clearly takes me a while, this is a place where I get a lot of strong ROI. I get a great return on that investment. In fact, a good chunk of my conversion to email subscribers who then turn into clients come from my YouTube channel. And so anything that I do that is related to YouTube content, I don't mind it taking me a little bit of time because I know that it's time worth spending. It's a great part of that 20% of the 80-20 rule. Okay. Let's see if there's anything else here that is super relevant. Okay, you can see I spent some time working on a book tracker, which is going to be an STC opt-in that we're working on. And I split that time over a couple of weeks, which is why the log is split. But that's not a horrible amount of time combined for me to be spending on it. I did some updating to my funnel for Tech Savvy Academy. I don't mind that time because it's worth spending, right? And then I spent just a little bit of time in the support channel for Tech Savvy Academy. And then I spent about 20 minutes in the TSA Trello VIP support channel. So these are all things that are worth spending my time. And so it's helping me to see, okay, yeah, I am spending a fair amount of time, but in a good way, right? One thing, though, that I know is that I did not track all of the time that I spent because, like I said, a lot of the stuff I do from my phone and then I don't remember to go in and track it, or I just would start working on something and then realize, oh, crap, I didn't start the tracker. And yeah, I can go in and manually do it. And I tried to do that when I thought of it, but I'm not sure I caught all of the time. So if I look at it here, though, on the main board and I just pull up kind of like the total. Let's see, can I expand this? Yeah, full screen. Then it's going to show me the full amount of time I logged was 11 hours and 47 minutes. And this is over the course of, let's see, so there's week totals. So week 1, week 2, week 3. So about 3 weeks. So I guess I only got about 3 weeks before that license expired. Huh. Or maybe I just didn't track anything I don't know. I thought I started tracking as soon as. Either way. So 11 hours. I'm curious to see how this will compare to me using the automation way of tracking time. because this is obviously tracking down to the minute as far as when I work on a task over a period of couple of days. I have a feeling though that the automation version of it is going to be tracking like the number of days spent on it. Like I don't think it's going to be as incremental, which is good and bad. I feel like it's going to force me to plan my time more accordingly and probably be a little bit more focused on the task at hand, which, honestly is probably not a horrible thing. So once I have spent a couple of weeks doing my time tracking that way, I'll come back in here and add to the video. So you'll be seeing it in a second, but it's going to be a few weeks from now for me. Okay, so like I said, the second way that I tracked my time in Trello was using automation. And I am not going to lie and say that this was an easy setup. As you already know, as I've already said, I definitely went to other Trello experts, one in particular, Dream Sweet Mike, who is fantastic with automation and getting really into like the formulaic aspect of automation. Stuff that I really, really want to learn and get to know better so that I can use it even more, because it all just reminds me just how powerful a tool like Trello can be when you delve into its true capabilities, right? So I'm going to show you the automations. I'm not going to show you how to build them or any of that. You'll see them here. If you want to try to copy them, you can, but this is not intended to be a tutorial. I'm just going to show you how it worked in theory and what it showed me. So you can already see kind of a little bit here. I also use dash cards as roll-ups. I just love dash cards. So for this version of time tracking, you do need to have custom fields, which means that you need to be in a paid Trello plan. So yes, for Chronos, the power up, we would have had to pay for a subscription there for sure. Here, you're going to be paying for Trello, but obviously you're getting so much more than just the time tracking if you're paying for Trello. And if you're already paying for Trello for other reasons, well, then you can do this right now, right? So let's look at essentially how this works. I'm going to go to one of my cards here. You can see I have not done this yet because I'm a little behind today. It's a Friday. I have a new puppy. And so, morning routine's been a little bit disrupted of late, but he's worth it. So you can see here that I have a bunch of custom fields here. Ignore this tracking time one because this is the one that we were using with the Chronos power up. So I created a separate one for this automation tracking time so that we could see the difference and they wouldn't get like intermingled or conflict with each other in any way. So essentially what you need here is a start time date field, and you need a stop time date field, and then you need a number field where the calculation is going to push out its result. And then you need some buttons. And so I ended up creating 3 buttons, and I'll explain why in a minute, but you have a start button, you have a stop button. And I created this third stop button with a done aspect to it. And I will show you how that works on the back end, why I needed the 2 different ones. You may not find that that's important to you, but because I use a lot of recurring automation, and because I have a combination here of tasks that are quick and done in one step, and then also things that are done in more of like I do a little bit here and there, and then it all adds up to being done, I wanted to make sure that I had control over whether or not the system considered the task completely done, or if it was just the stopping of that particular session, if that makes sense. Okay, so let's go into the automation and let's look at the buttons first. So we've got our start session button, and this is just setting that custom field start time to right now. And what that automatically does is it gives it the date, but it's also got a timestamp in it. And that is the key piece of making this time tracking possible. Because we don't just care about, well, I started it today, because what if you do a working session today, you start it today, you end it today? Well, if there's no time involved there, what's it tracking really, right? It's going to look like no time being tracked. So it's important to realize that natively, these date stamps come with a timestamp as well. So the same thing for the stop session is setting the custom field stop time to now. Okay, these are 2 different nows because the first one is the now when I start, and the second one is the now when I stop. And then I added one more thing here, and this is where it's a stop session done, where I've actually completed the entirety of that task. And that's where, again, I still set the date field to now, but I also add the marking the card as complete. In that situation, it then triggers my recurring automations to happen. So that's why that piece is super important. It allows me to have just one click in order to trigger multiple activities to happen. So those are those 3 buttons. And then we're going to go into the rules. That is where all the meat is. So this is where it really just kind of went beyond my skill set, but I learned a lot through this, and I love learning more complex stuff, just like you guys are coming here to learn stuff from me. I absolutely am always learning from others. Okay, so we've got a couple of time tracking things here. So some of it I was using kind of like an in progress list and then moving it to done, and then it was automatically calculating like based on how much time it sat in the in progress list. Honestly, for my purposes, I didn't really need that, but I could see that being beneficial for someone who is maybe tracking time for a client, being able to say, when they're have their card in their in progress list while they're working on it and then moving it. And then that would be a very simple way to track how much time was spent on that client's work or whatever. Not really necessary for me, but the ones that were important for me are these few. Okay, so this one you can already see right here. I'm not even going to try to tell you that I understand exactly what's happening in all of this. This is stuff that I'm still trying to learn and grasp. But essentially, what it's doing, just in practicality, is when it sees that the start time and stop time fields are filled, right? Which we're doing when we are clicking that start button and stop button, right? When it sees that they are filled, it is running this calculation. Oh, which that just made that harder to read, so I won't do that. It was running this calculation into that tracked time field, okay? And then we immediately have it clear the date fields because we want to be able to reset and then add to it as we go. Another thing that turned out to be important here is that when you create a new card on the board, you want to make sure that that custom field, that tracked time field, is automatically set at 0. I'm not entirely sure why this is. This is kind of like a quirk of the system, I think, where if it's just blank, it doesn't necessarily play as well into all of this as if it's got like a 0 value. So I just automated that so that I didn't have to remember to go in and do it. Anytime a card gets created, regardless of how it's created, it's going to automatically set itself to 0 on that field. Then the last thing we have here are these last 2 workflows, and these are to make sure that we only have 2 decimal points in the result from this crazy formula here, because what was happening was I was getting like, 1.004500, like it was just crazy long. It wasn't going to mean anything to me. And I just wanted it to be truncated at 2 decimal points. So again, thanks to Mike, I got these 2 automation workflows with these formulas in them so that it then knows if it is rounding up or rounding down to just truncate that to 2 decimal points. Okay. Again, this is not a tutorial. So if you want a tutorial, maybe I'll actually see if Mike will come on and do a tutorial. That would be cool. Let's see if we get enough interest in that. I'll reach out to him. So let me know in the comments if you would like to not only learn how to set this up better, but also understand it better. And then the last thing that I did here was I set up these dash cards to roll up that tracked time field. So what I did for myself here is I have one where it's looking at the recurring activities that are daily. That's primarily my fresh pins right now. That is the daily thing that I'm tracking because I want to make sure that that's not something that is taking over and taking up more time than I realize. Because it requires a level of graphic design and, writing pin descriptions and things like that, there was always the possibility that I was spending more time on it than I realized and that it wasn't as beneficial as I had hoped or would hope it would be. But you can see right here that actually it's pretty good because I did this time tracking for about 3 weeks, just like I did with the Chronos power up, and found that in those 3 weeks, that really just the fresh pins alone, I spent only an hour total. So that's an every single day thing, but only an hour total in 3 weeks. That means if my math is correct, and it could be wrong, so please correct me in the comments if I'm way off here. But that means that I spent roughly like 3 to 4 minutes a day on that. That is not bad, guys. So I am totally happy with the ROI that I'm getting there. The one that I needed to really see for myself was on the weekly tasks. And this is also where the start and then the two different stop buttons became important for me because as you can see, I have, certain things that don't take a whole lot of time. Writing a newsletter, I typically do that in one sitting. Backing up my websites and everything like that. I mean, that's, kind of hands off. So it doesn't take much time at all. As you can see, both of these are pretty minimal when it comes to their amount of time. These are all for the entire 3 weeks. So it's not bad at all for the entirety of the 3 weeks. But then we talk about filming, and look, you can see that number goes up significantly because I film 3 full-length videos a week, and I edit them. This is all going to take a lot more time, so it is not at all unexpected to see a higher number here, a higher level of investment of my time here. But again, this is where my ROI is the greatest. So this is telling me that, yeah, so far I'm seeing that I'm spending my time in the most effective place in my business in those recurring tasks. So I like that. Good news for me. And then I had, things like scheduling content. Like I've said in the past, I do content for my Success Through Community podcast every other week. So that one isn't too bad. And then this one looks even less than that, scheduling my weekly content for TSA. But you got to remember that that is actually in addition to filming, because a big chunk of my content for TSA is the filming, right? So when you combine those two together, obviously, again, the lion's share of what I'm doing, but for good reason. It's the point of my business. So that means that in the course of those 3 weeks, I spent roughly 9 hours on all of those weekly tasks. Now, this is assuming that I remembered to track, because that is the problem with the automation version versus the Chronos version. So in the Chronos version, like I mentioned, I had the ability to go in and manually log a work session if I forgot to click those buttons, or if I was working from my phone and, didn't have access because of the power up. I had the ability to manually do that. Now, I probably could manually add in time into that tracked time field, but I certainly can't manually put times into those dates fields and expect them to calculate in that way. It doesn't work in the same way. It's not as easy to do a manual log there. So that's where the challenge comes up for me of it's hard for me to remember to always click and track that time. So I'm certain that I missed some time here and there. I'm certain that I missed some time on the dailies, and I'm certain that I missed time on the weeklies, but this shows me enough. It shows me trends so that I have an idea of overall where my time is going. Okay, so I got a ton of valuable information for myself out of both ways of doing this, but I think what I learned the most, like the outcome that was most obvious for me, is that I don't remember to track my time very well. I thought that doing it over the course of it ended up being like about 6 or 7 weeks total, that it would become more habit for me to remember to click that button. But I think because of the way that I utilize pockets of time in my business to get certain things done, I don't always sit down for like a working session in the same way. So yes, I found myself doing a decent job of clicking those start and stop buttons when it was like a focused working session. But I know I didn't account for a ton of time that I just worked in pockets of time elsewhere. So that to me means that if I'm not in a situation where I need to do this for billable hours, whether I'm tracking the time of a VA or employee or something so that I can make sure to pay them correctly, or, if in my business I need to be able to show itemized billable hours to a client before I send them an invoice. Obviously, in those cases, there's a direct need for, and just you have to find a way to push through and get that stuff tracked correctly. But when it's just for my own benefit and that I can learn more about where my effort is going and make sure that I tweak my strategy and create the most efficiency possible for myself, I think this is something that I might repeat for myself on, I don't know, maybe an annual basis, just to see if things have shifted and changed because my life circumstances have changed or my priorities have shifted. So, for that reason and many others, I'm going to be sticking with the automation version because A, it's free. So, I don't have to worry about paying for a subscription to a power up. B, it's not a power up, so it works on mobile. I can push that button from anywhere, although I do not often remember to do it from mobile. That is something I definitely need to work on if I'm going to try to build that habit in. But I found it so helpful for me to see where my time is actually going and how much effort is really going into, creating content for YouTube and everything that surrounds that. And while it is obviously more than I maybe realized it was, I see that the ROI there is so high that it makes it completely worth it. So, making sure that I'm spending time where it's appropriate. And you could see that a lot of my daily tasks, especially my fresh pins, they don't take me very much time at all. So while they don't have a huge ROI in my business, they have one that is relative to the amount of time investment that I'm giving it. So I'm curious if you think that you might kind of try this out. Like I said, this is not intended to be a tutorial of how to set up that automation. So if you want me to go deeper into how to set up that automation, and again, shouting out to Dream Sweet Mike because I would not have gotten there without him, let me know because I would be happy to work on a video for that in the future. The online tools for your business do not need to be complicated and overwhelming. It's time to let it be easy. I hope you liked that video, and more importantly, that you found it helpful. If you did, please consider subscribing to the channel and sharing it with a fellow solopreneur. And make sure you check out the description for links to how we can connect and maybe even work together.